Hi guys, and welcome to this week's video. In this video we're going to be looking at the new unRAID 6.4 and comparing it alongside to the earlier unRAID to see what's new. We'll also go through how to upgrade to this version, how to set up our SSL certificates, encrypt disks and all the other good stuff. So let's get started. So, unRAID 6.4. Yes, we've got it. It's left the RC stage and it's now been released as 6.4.0 stable. And yes, it's really good. So what I thought I'd do in this video is to run up two servers together with similar specs, one running the older 6.3.5 and the other running the new 6.4.0. And that way, I think we can easily look at and set up the new features and just see what's what. Then after looking at the differences and the new features, we'll then upgrade the 6.3.5 unRAID to the new 6.4.0 and follow the best practices along the way for doing this. So here are the two systems side by side, and you can see which version is which from the numbers at the top here in the banner. And the 6.3.5 and the 6.4.0, these are the latest two stable versions of unRAID which have been released. The 6.3.5 was released on the 26th of May 2017 and the 6.4.0 was released on the 12th of January 2018. And in between those times we've had the beta and RC versions leading up to this release. So to start, let's compare with what's under the hood. So let's see which Linux kernel each is based on. Let's look at the older version first. And we can see here it's running the Linux 4.9.30 kernel. And so now let's look at the new version here. And this is running Linux 4.14.13. And this kernel has patches to address the meltdown vulnerability and fully mitigates against this. But for the Spectra vulnerability, patches have not been actually released for this as yet, so that's something that will come in the future. If you're still on 6.3.5, it's a really good idea to get onto this kernel just to protect yourself against the meltdown vulnerabilities. Okay, so next let's look at which version of Docker each of these unRAID instances are running. So the older version of unRAID is running Docker version 1.12.6. And the new release is running Docker version 17.09.1-CE. And talking about Docker, one of my favourite things about this new version of unRAID is we can actually assign IP addresses from the web UI for each Docker container that we have. So let's look at Plex. So at the moment, when I open Plex, it's on the IP address of my unRAID server. And for me here, this is 10.10.20.198. Now if we go to the template and click on edit, we can see here under network type we've now got bridge, host, non, and we've also got our bridged networks. And you can see here the BR0, if I click onto that, I can now enter a static IP address for this particular container. So I'm going to give this one 10.10.20.190. And so now when I start the web UI for Plex, we're on a totally separate IP address, and this feature of being able to assign IP addresses to containers is a really useful thing. Now it was possible to do in previous versions of unRAID, but not through the web UI. It was far more difficult. We had to use a container called Pipework and assign IP addresses through that. Now I'm not going to go into how to do that because it's absolutely obsolete now. And also just one thing to notice is if you are actually running this on a previous version of unRAID, please make sure you uninstall it before upgrading, because it can cause problems. But we'll look at that again later when we update the 6.3.5 to the newest version later on. But you'll see in the older version of unRAID, we only had the network type as bridge, host and non, so we couldn't assign an IP address at all. So next, let's just look at VMs. And we can see here the libvirt version is 2.4.0 and the QEMU version here is 2.7.1. And if we compare that to the new version, you see that we've moved on here to libvirt 3.8.0 and QEMU version 2.10.2, so a much more updated version. And one of the advantages of running this newer QEMU version in the 6.4, if anyone's running any OS X VMs, we can add a line to the XML. The VMware-CPUID-frequency on allows us to use unpatched versions of Clover when running an OS X VM. So if we start up the VM here, it will work fine. But if we try and use the same thing in an earlier version of unRAID, and we get an execution error because it doesn't understand the parameters that we pass through. So that's one of the improvements that we have with the new version of QEMU. And another thing you'll notice is that the WebVNC mouse tracking is a lot better in this newer version. Whilst we're looking at VMs, there's another really nice improvement to the unRAID Web Template Manager, which is really useful. Now when we assign cores in 6.4, we can see the thread pairing. And for those of you who are not sure what I mean by this, well, with a CPU with hyper-threaded cores, for best performance in a VM, it's best practice to pass through each core with both of its hyperthreads. So let's look at how it used to be. In 6.35, when we looked at pinning cores, we saw the cores like this. So it's difficult to easily assign each core with its own hyperthread without looking, for example, at the dashboard where you can see each core and its corresponding hyperthread. So it's really easy to make a mistake when you are trying to pin both hyperthreads for each core. So now let's look at the difference in 6.4. And now when we look at the template manager, we can see each core and with its each individual hyperthread. So now it's really easy to assign the hyperthreads. And this is absolutely invaluable when it comes to servers with high core counts, because we can easily just put the cores on with the correct hyperthreads that we need. Now another big improvement is unRAID 6.4 uses NGINX web server to power the unRAID web GUI, and this brings loads of advantages over the old system. It gives us multi-threaded access, bringing much better performance. Now we can open another tab whilst one is doing something else. Let me show you, but first we'll look at how it used to be in 6.3.5 and then compare. Now let's install a container and at the same time try and open another tab. Oh, it doesn't seem like the Docker's actually installing. Yep, the page is actually frozen, it's become unresponsive. I actually forgot that the 6.3 unRAID, this used to happen sometimes and the web UI would lock up. I'm actually kind of glad that it's happened in the video so we can see how much it's improved in the new version. Okay, so let's go back and try again. We'll pull down the Crusader Docker container and then try and open some other tabs at the same time. Right, we can see here that something's happening. The web page is obviously busy, and if we try and click on any of these like settings and try and right click them, absolutely nothing happens. Oh, and we can see here we've got a page unresponsive again. So whilst we're waiting for the page to free up on 6.3, let's go across to 6.4 and we'll install the same container, the Crusader container, and we'll open some other tabs whilst it's doing so. And you can see here I've opened up the dashboard and we can scroll through and check everything, see our CPUs, etc. We can even open a VM and open up the web VNC. So we can carry on doing other jobs and we don't have to wait for that particular process to finish. Now if we go back across to the 6.3.5, we can see now this is finished, and so now we can open up other tabs and the web UI is responsive again. Now that process is finished. So in 6.3.5 we couldn't do sort of more than one thing at once with the web UI, and in 6.4 that's a thing of the past. Right, so let's quickly switch back across to 6.4, and if you see at the top here we've got some other buttons that we don't have on the 6.3. We've got terminal and we've got logout. Now the unRAID web GUI supports WebSockets now, so that means we've got things like terminal here where we can just open up a command prompt straight into the web browser, so we don't need to SSH into the server. So now we don't need to use clients like PuTTY. It's much easier. So in my opinion that's a really useful tool. And also for extra security we've now got a logout button, so when we finished on the web UI we can just click onto logout and it closes the session. and so to get back into the web UI we have to enter the username and password again. Yeah, I know it's not secure because my browser remembers, but if you didn't have it remembered it would be secure. And now talking about security, that brings us on to probably 6.4's most major upgrade, and that's block level disk encryption. HTTPS is needed so that there's a secure way for us to enter the passphrase we choose for our disk encryption, and NGINX supports this. unRAID disk encryption uses LukHash, and we have the choice of 3 different encrypted file systems to use. We can use an encrypted XFS, ButterFS or RISA file format. And formatting the drive will result in creating an encrypted partition on the drive with that specified file system. But one thing to note that during this format any data that's on the drive already will be destroyed. At the moment we can't do an in-place encrypt on an existing drive. However, if people want it, I may make a video on converting an existing array to an encrypted array with the use of a spare drive and the unbalanced plugin, as I'm planning on doing so on my main server next week. So if you want me to make a video whilst I do this, then just let me know in the comments below. Right, so now let's set up HTTPS and disk encryption, but I think we'll do this when upgrading the 6.3.5 server to 6.4, and then add an encrypted disk during the upgrade process. So let's go across to the 6.3 server now and make a start. And before we upgrade there's some preparation to do. What we're going to do is we're going to update all of the plugins and all of the Docker containers. So let's start with the plugins. Okay, so I don't have many plugins to update. It looks like it's just maybe 1 or 2, so I'm going to update the community applications. Now let's look to see what other plugins need updating. And the only other one for me here is actually the unRAID server OS itself, but I'm not going to actually upgrade that now. So now I'm going to check if there are any updates for the Docker containers. So I'm going to click check for updates here. And the reason we check for the updates for the plugins and the Docker containers before upgrading, it's because we want to make sure we've got the latest versions, because sometimes we'll find the older versions of plugins and Dockers just aren't compatible with the new version of unRAID we're upgrading to. So always upgrade everything first. So all of my containers are up to date, I don't need to update anything, but I do need to remove this obsolete container here, because if I don't it will cause trouble with 6.4. And anyway, we don't need the pipework container now because unRAID natively supports assigning IP addresses to Docker containers. Now next we just want to go to settings and then go to VM manager, because we just need to check that all the settings here are correct, otherwise the array won't start when we upgrade. You can see here that I don't have a default ISO storage path set. So if I don't set this, the array won't start up when I upgrade. So I'm going to set that now. Now I'm sure for most people it will have already been set anyway, but it's just worth a check before you upgrade. And actually there's 2 plugins that I should really remove before upgrading. One is the sleep plugin and the other is the pre-clear plugin. Now I've upgraded a few of my servers recently to 6.4. I didn't have trouble with these plugins, but some people have reported that if they leave them in then there can be an issue. So the best thing I think is to remove the plugins and then put them back in after you've upgraded to 6.4. And also while you're on the plugin page, if you have fixed common problems installed, just quickly run that and make sure there aren't any problems with your server that you can sort out beforehand. Now this next step probably isn't going to be relevant to most users. It's only going to be relevant if you change the port number to which you connect to the unRAID web UI. And you can see here I've changed mine to 8080. Now I've only done that for this video just so I can demonstrate how to make the changes. So if in an earlier version of unRAID you've changed the connection port, you would have done that in the Go file. So let's have a look at this with a text editor. And you can see it's this part here, the -p and then the port number. So I'm going to remove this now. Now when editing files in unRAID, always make sure you use a proper text editor. In Windows I'd suggest Notepad++. Please don't use the normal Notepad because you'll have problems if you do. And I'm using a Mac and I'm using TextMate. Okay, so now we've removed that out of the Go file, we can actually add the port numbers back in, but we do that in a different file. We do that in the ident.cfg file. So let's edit that, again with the text editor. And now we need to paste these 3 lines underneath, and then we change the port numbers to suit. And obviously I'm going to change mine back to 8080, and I'm going to change the SSL port to 8443, and then just save the file. Okay, but like I said, most people probably won't need to do that. Again, this next feature isn't for everyone, but it will be useful for you guys running Ryzen CPUs. LimeTech have put something in 6.4 called Zen states. And what this does is it disables the C states on your Ryzen CPU, and all we have to do is add a line to the Go file with a text editor, and we just pop the line above this one here and then save the file. But actually I'm not going to save this file myself, because this server is actually running on an i7 CPU, so this wouldn't be relevant to this server. Okay, so that's all the preparation done for the upgrade. So let's go back to the server, upgrade unRAID, and then reboot. Okay, so the server's rebooted, and you can see now I'm still connecting through the custom port number here, and I've actually changed the banner just to say 6.4.0. And the first thing I'm going to do in 6.4 is I'm going to change the port number back to the default one by going to identification. Then you'll see here now we can change the port numbers. We can change the port for the HTTP port and the HTTPS port. So I'm just going to change them back to the default values and then just log back in. Okay, so now we're in 6.4, we can just start up the array and use the server. We don't have to do anything else unless we want to. But now let's set up our SSL certificate and also encrypt a disk. So first let's go to settings, and we'll actually go to disk settings first and set the default file format now to be an encrypted type, and I'm going to set mine to encrypted XFS. Right, so now let's set up our SSL certificate. Let's go to identification and then scroll down and click on provision. Now hopefully everything should be fine and you won't get an error like I'm just about to get. And this is because my router's got rebinding protection enabled, and I'm using a pfSense router, and so we can go into that and easily change it. So here I am in pfSense, and we need to go to services, then DNS resolver, and then we want to scroll down and click on display custom options, and then just paste this into the box below. Then click save and then apply changes. If we click on certificate expiration here, then we get some information telling us what to do for various routers, and here's the information for pfSense here. You can see there's other routers like DDWRT and various others, so have a look through there if you get stuck. And once you've done that, you can click on provision, and then you should get a message saying your SSL certificate and DNS record have been created. So then click onto OK, and then you'll see the URL at the top has actually changed to something with a long number and lots of letters in it. Now don't worry, you don't have to remember this. You can just always put your normal IP address in and it will just resolve to this. So let's just try that now and type in the IP address of the server. And there we are, it just goes straight to the HTTPS address with the funny long number in it. And for those of you who are worrying that there's a DNS server somewhere in the world with your IP address in it, well, it doesn't have your public IP address, so nobody can track you or trace you or anything like that. It only has a private IP address, an internal one, such as 192.168.1.10 or something. So millions and millions of other people have it in the world, so it's absolutely not able to identify you in any way, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now with SSL all set up, let's actually add a new disk to the array and then format it with an encryption. So first we're going to have to stop the array, and then I'm going to add another disk as a second data disk here. I'm going to use this USB 1TB drive here. So just add it into the array and then just scroll down to the bottom of the page, and here we have to enter our encryption key. Now we can use a key file, so we can use like a file off the computer or a passphrase. I'm going to use a passphrase, but make sure it's not something you're going to forget, because without it you're not going to be able to decrypt your data and your data is going to be useless. So make sure you always remember it. So with the passphrase created, we can now start the array and format the drive. You can see here on disk 2 it says it's unmountable, it's an unsupported partition layout. So we just need to go back down to the bottom of the page and just put a check here where it says yes, I want to do this to format the disk, and then click on to format. And you can see now the disk is formatting. And now you'll see here when it's formatted and finished, there's a green padlock next to the disk. Now that means the disk is an encrypted disk and it's currently actually open with the passphrase, that's why it's green. But obviously there's no data on this disk as yet, but when the array writes data to this drive it will be encrypted. But any data written to disk 1, the original disk that was in the array, that won't be encrypted because it's not got an encrypted file format. And we can see that because there's no padlock next to the disk. And so that's it, that's how we set up an encrypted disk on the new 6.4 unRAID. So that brings us to the end of this video, but before I go I'd really like to take an opportunity to thank the LimeTech team for bringing us this excellent release, the 6.4, and I think really all of us should go on the forums and just write a note to them and let them know how much we appreciate all the hard work that they put into this product. Well guys, thanks a lot for watching the video and I really hope you enjoyed it and you found it useful. If you did then please help me out and hit the like button, and if you're not a subscriber then please subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you really like the channel and you'd like to help support the channel then any donations are really appreciated, which you can do through the links in the description or on the channel homepage. Anyway guys, whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good and I'll catch you in the next video.